and it becomes, I think, the idea of just having a hybrid plant doesn't solve this issue. In some cases, it probably complicates it, because now you have a farmer who has to come back to the tap every year and put his money on the table every year with one producer or one intellectual property holder, if you want to call, if that's where this thing goes, which is a scary monopoly or oligopoly to think that you're going to allow a big important sector to get into, where one or two major patent holders have absolutely not only the right but complete control of availability of a crop. That's tough. I have a really hard time with that, and we're already feeling it in our courts with Roundup-resistant strains of soybeans, with Roundup-resistant strains of I think cotton, I believe, is facing this as well, where you have a company who invested a lot of money, but who own the problem and the solution, so that they own the patent on the product that is really important, Roundup. I mean, from an environmental standpoint, all kinds of problems, but from an agricultural standpoint, there are thousands of ways to measure the dramatic historic successes of that product. It changed yields in so many crops in so many parts of the world dramatically. And then to not only own this solution that creates a problem for plant life, then to create a strain of plant life that you also own. I think that not only is there an ethical problem there that we've got to get serious about. As a business guy, I think there's a business problem there that is a real issue. Because I think any company ought to have the right to recoup its investment and make a profit. So companies who are in this business, we want them to have the incentive to spend billions of dollars in capital to do good research and development. And they have a right to recover that. But I don't know that they have a right to sole dominance in the marketplace. And there's that other end of the spectrum that I think, especially when we get into terminal hybrids or into terminal designer crops, we've got to take that on. And it's something that's got to be a big debate. I mean, it needs to feel like an important debate. It doesn't need to happen up the street here among lobbyists and policymakers and then be kind of sold out through the journalism side of things. It needs to be a public debate on what that means on the other side, because I think we're only starting to feel the impacts of constraints, significant constraints of water availability. We're measuring dramatic problems from water quality problems related to agriculture. But as climate change punches down on the accelerator of water availability problems, it's going to hit agriculture in two ways. Areas that are already water poor or stressed are going to enter into really dark times, I think. Other areas that are highly productive that we rely on without thinking are going to change too. And we're going to have to get in the lab and be ready for that with crops that don't face the same vulnerabilities as current crops to those pressures. We're going to have to take it on. So I think the time to have all of these ethical debates is now. And we've got to have the business debate, we've got to have the environmental debate, and I think we've got to have just the general ethical what is life and how do we go about modifying it debate. So those are critical things we've got to have now. Environmentalists who lock the door and stay on the outside, I think, are fools, because we need this sector to be innovative. If agriculture isn't innovative, isn't remarkably innovative, the environmental problems we're already seeing now related to agriculture are going to be exponentially worse as things like climate change put pressures on them. So, I mean, to me, that's my view of the issue. Those are the areas. The last thing I'll throw in there is that what frustrates me looking into this now as a farm kid is that this debate gets characterized as kind of a farm debate. And so people instantly say, well, the reason we should dive into this thing maybe without having the ethical discussions and without setting the parameters is that we're talking about food after all, right? But farming isn't always food. Matter of fact, a huge chunk of the R&D dollars, the research that's gone into this issue, if we're really honest with ourselves about it, is around crops like soybeans that do have a food value, no doubt. But the real value of that commodity globally has a lot of other derivative uses. It doesn't make it an unimportant crop. It is an important crop, and it's a crop that needs to be in our fields, a crop that we need to study. But it isn't necessarily feeding the world. And this perception of rushing ahead so that we can feed hungry people and save lives, and rushing ahead without having really principled discussions and setting standards so that we can save lives, that's a foolish argument, because we are doing more about returning significant yields for big commodity crops like soybeans and corn that aren't going onto people's plates. They're going into a lot of other things that are typically subsidized marketplaces or just convenient marketplaces. So I have a frustration in that it feels to me on the Hill and in the debate sometimes that we're not having the kind of discussion we have on principles, because we think we're saving lives with moving forward on food. And this isn't a food discussion, it's just a crop discussion. Okay, so that's my rant.
That's great. Thank you.
Do you have any questions? Did I miss?
That was awesome, totally awesome, and it was a great length too. So
Okay.
I think if I had a question, it would be, do you see an issue with homogenizing the DNA of crops? So, I mean, something another person had brought up is that if you have fields and fields of a crop with one single type of DNA, you're always competing against Mother Nature, and she's always going to throw out new, pests, which of course are just, it's subjective. What's a pest? I mean, pests, all it would take is one new species to overcome this DNA, to get around it, to wipe out the entire thing. Is that,
I think homogeneity